Why winter weddings were impossible in Viking times. For Vikings, marriage was a union of families. It affected property holdings and inheritance. Negotiations were carried out before the wedding. The families determined the dowry and set the date. Traditionally, weddings were held on Fridays. It was a day for Frigg, the goddess of marriage. Weddings typically lasted a week. Family and friends traveled to attend them. Weddings were never held in winter. This would render travel impractical. Weddings required appropriate accommodations. The families had to get enough food and drink for guests. They also brewed a special ale for the newlyweds. Setting a date could delay weddings for years. Before the wedding, brides and grooms were separated. The bride was stripped of her old clothing. She removed her gilt circlet called kransen. It was a symbol of her unwed status. The kransen would be stored for her future daughter. The bride then cleansed herself in a bathhouse. Hot stones were placed in the tub to produce steam. The bride switched herself with birch twigs. It symbolically washed away her maiden status. A Viking groom had to rid himself of bachelorhood. He would break into the grave of his ancestor. There, he would retrieve a family sword. Through this action, he entered death as a boy. He emerged into life as a man reborn. Once the groom had his sword, he went to a bathhouse. His attendants would be his father and married friends. They instructed him on husbandly duties. A Viking bride didn't have a wedding gown. The focus was on her hair and bridal crown. The crown was typically a family heirloom. It was made of silver and adorned with crystals. It had elaborate designs like crosses and clover leaves. The crown was draped with red and green silk cords. The wedding started with an exchange of dowry. It was followed by a religious ceremony. The ceremony began by summoning the gods. The process may have involved a sacrifice. Vikings used animals associated with gods of fertility. They used a goat for Thor and a sow for Freya. For Freyr, they sacrificed a boar or horse. The animal's blood was placed on an altar in a bowl. A bundle of fir twigs was dipped in the blood. It was sprinkled on the couple as the god's blessing. The groom presented his ancestral sword to his bride. The bride kept it for their future sons. She then gifted the groom a sword of her ancestors. The sword symbolized a father's protection of a bride. During the ceremony, it was transferred to her husband. The couple then exchanged rings on the hilt of the swords. The bride and groom were required to drink bride ale. Their union was only binding once they did so. The ale was usually honey-based mead. It had to be drunk throughout the honeymoon.